Welcome to another episode of Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World. Our co-hosts, Sri Rajagopalan and Peter V.S. Bond, explore how brands and retailers engage with consumers in-store, online, and everywhere in between. And now, here's Sri and Peter.
Welcome to Consumer Engagement in an Omnichannel World with Sri and Peter Bond. And today we have special guest Bryan Gildenberg in episode 5 of a 6-part series focused on the omnichannel shopper. And today we take on one of the most important transformational areas in the journey of moving to digital retail, aka e-commerce, and that is Media 2020. And so, Bryan, could you please introduce yourself for us?
Hi there. I'm Bryan Gildenberg, the SVP of Commerce for the Omnicom Retail Group, and we, which represents the agencies at Omnicom that are most concerned with shopper marketing and retail marketing. And this conversation is pretty germane to me specifically, in that a lot of what I was hired to do here was to help both the ORG agencies and Omnicom elevate its presence in the retail media space and try to figure out exactly where it's all going. So ORG, better known to most of you by the agencies it trades under, which are the Integer Group, Tracy Locke, Haygarth, TPN, and TMA. Prior to this, I spent about 23 years at Kantar, studying retail around the world, and both brick and mortar, and for about the last 12 years or so, the e-commerce space. So.
Of course, being here with you and Peter, thank you for being here as well. And engaging with our industry knowledge captain and legend on such an important topic is just, today I'm really thrilled to kick this one off. So
I was gonna say, when's this person coming? They sound great.
the biggest question I've personally had to deal with, and we're wearing multiple hats, multiple brands through multiple large and small brands in the last 7 or 8 years I've been in e-commerce, is media really the same as it was 5 years ago? But and the transformational nature of how retail media has appeared, and for the most part, Amazon came into the lens, and because of that, media has had no choice but to transform, including in the agency world. So Bryan, let me kick it off by asking you that very simple question. In 2020, is media the same it was? I won't even go back into and really pull you into the discussion on TV and print, because digital has been around 20 years or 15 years at least. But is media in 2020 the same it was 5 years ago, or even like last month?
Well, certainly not 5 years ago, no. Last month, maybe. I think it's certainly closer. The shifts are, profound, but also kind of obvious in terms of where media has gone. It's clearly become more digital. It's amazing to think that if I had told a marketer in 2010 that half or more of your marketing spend would be biddable in 2020, you would have looked at me like I'd lost my mind. In terms of how you actually buy Google and Facebook space. I do think that I think people vastly underestimated the degree to which the mobile ecosystem would concentrate media. And I think that's probably the most counterintuitive change from less than 5 years ago. When digital media was still digital, you had this notion that, oh man, anybody can get into the game and it's going to be niche-y and all this other stuff. And one of my old friends at WPP, Rob Norman, I think once described I think it was him who described the mobile ecosystem as being a lot like 1980s cable television. It's not that there's 3 choices, there's 30, but there's only 30. There's not 300. And the concentration of attention in a mobile world, combined with the concentration of fragmented content into a very few platforms like Netflix and Spotify, et cetera, I think has really reconcentrated the media ecosystem in a way that I think if you'd asked somebody 3 years ago what it would look like now, that would be what would surprise them.
So Bryan, we talked about this in some prior episodes, but for our audience that isn't as attuned to the world of digital media and thinks of this as more monolithic, you want to help our listeners understand the difference between digital media and what we've referred to as retail media?
I'll give it a whirl. Yeah, I think because I do think this gets blurry because you've got things that are obviously not retail media. So a television ad on NCIS Bismarck, right? That's not retail media. An ad placed on Walmart.com is retail media. So now, so that's easy. The continuum, I think, gets involved in two areas. Number one is, so any media that's kind of placed within a retailer's a captive ecosystem, I think could easily be described as retail media. There's two questions that come out of that. One, is media that is not in the retailer's captive ecosystem, but aimed at moving the consumer into that ecosystem, is that retail media? I would say it probably is. Just because the ways in which you would plan and evaluate it have more in common with retail planning than they do with media planning. So I think it's probably better if you put that, what I would call retail adjacent media, kind of into a sort of a more retail-y bucket. And then I think the other one, which is, right now, really unique to one American retailer, which is Amazon, which is the Amazon's placing media on Amazon, given how much engagement in Amazon is not shopping on Amazon related, I think is a very open question about exactly whether that's retail media or media that's doing the job of media that happens to be placed in an ecosystem owned by a retailer. And I think over time, some other retailers will develop that. But as of now, I think that almost has to be counted as retail media as well, simply because it affects what your behavior within a retail environment. So I would be quite broad in my definition.
Yeah, let me add one thought to this, that if you think about those who are using not retail media, but digital media, increasingly the targets that they use for that media are based upon an amalgamation of loyalty data coming from a number of different retailers, and that builds the audience. So the lines are blurring between the both.
Well, and that's been true for years. What used to be the old Spire data ecosystem that turned into Datalogix, that turned into Oracle, as well as obviously the IRI loyalty. I mean, these massive data sets are a huge part of the targeting process. I probably wouldn't call that retail media per se, because you're not trying to route someone to a particular retailer there. You're just trying to inform your media purchase so that it can be a little bit more effective. That's where retail is more of a data source than a strategic platform.
So Bryan, I think you open up a nice little can for me here with the word biddable media, which really comes back to me as a skill set gap. I think to the average, even the average market, leave alone sales for a second, but the average marketer, understanding that you may not actually win a campaign because you didn't bid the right amount versus write the check for an amount that you felt was right, is a little bit of a shock. And I don't think as a full marketing universe, we're there completely. And it might also be a reason why we don't want to accept biddable media as a large part of our strategy, because you cannot control it. Someone else controls the outcome of whether the media is placed or not. But that does bring up a very kind of a nascent question in my head, which is, where should retail media in an organization rightfully belong? I know you gave the example of Kroger, where it's a direct conversion opportunity, versus you just talked about Amazon a little while ago, where it might be through browse without a purchase being happening on Amazon. But currently, if you look across corporate America and you look through different companies and brands, the story is the same. It's a hodgepodge of being all over the place. But in most cases, for the most part, marketing does have an influence, but the actual physical unit that does the retail media sits within a selling organization.
Yeah.
And I felt strongly, Bryan, that it really belongs in marketing. Any opinions on that one?
I think it's a bit of a mess. I want to break this into two parts, because I think there's a specific mess around search. And this is one where I think search in a retail ecosystem is interesting. And I think it'll be fascinating to watch what happens as Criteo starts to syndicate its platform, as opposed to being a one retailer at a time. As Criteo changes the way they monetize stuff, you're going to be able much more easily, I think, to look at search across multiple platforms. And I think that'll accelerate the transition you're talking about. The one caution I always have with that is that oftentimes retail search, especially when you're paying to influence it, behaves a lot more like a technique that an account team understands better than a digital marketing team. Because if you think about what retail search is, you're buying search, right? So you're putting your product in the way of someone who's trying to buy something, whether it's your product that they can buy more quickly or something else where you're hoping to interrupt them on the way to buying that product, that's not semantic search, that's an end cap. So, and a lot of digital search ends up behaving a lot like classic old school analog retail marketing. And the problem you run into is that, you know, brand marketers aren't used to the immediacy of the return on ad spend you get from an end cap. So the minute they start spending on search, you're like, holy crap, this really works. And you end up dumping all your money into it because it's so much more obviously effective than other things, because it's basically, it's a retail related spend, not really in the end a brand spend. You're really spending money to influence someone's purchase journey and decision. And that's where I get a little nervous in search about marketing groups owning it, because you've got people that look at search very much from a Google perspective, trying to figure out how to make search in a Walmart or a Criteo world. And those mechanics, or Amazon or Criteo world or Walmart or whatever, that's just a mechanically different problem you're solving in the end. So that worries me a bit. I think more broadly, yes, inevitably, the more non-purchase related engagement the retailers have over time, which you have to assume they're going to have, the more that media exercised in their environment is going to have less direct purchase related objectives. And the more, once you get outside of purchase related objectives, that's where I do think you need a marketing, a function that knows how to measure the effectiveness of a branding campaign against both commercial and brand objectives is essential to placing that media well. And that's a skill set that does tend to live in the marketing group.
Well, if owners of the media budget are going to look to leadership to continue to fund that investment, they're going to have to deliver success metrics. So from your perspective, what are the metrics that brands should be using to measure success in digital media?
And I'd like to append to that. And
yes.
You know, I've been working on my own DTC venture here. Amazon's average ROAS on search is north of 2.5 or closer to 3.
Yeah.
But if you looked at the average media campaign, which is difficult to attribute, and you look at a ROAS, some days it's tempting to say, let's just dump all the money into Amazon. But I know that's not the right thing to do.
Well, there are a number of startup brands that have done exactly that and done fairly well out of it. So you know, I can't tell tales out of school, but there are a couple of billion-dollar brands that's basically what they did. So and there's, you know, there may not be anything wrong with that. You know, I'm not sure, to be honest. I would say that in general, though, for brands that are more established, I think the ROAS is how I would put this, which is beyond ROAS, which is, okay, ROAS is great, but that's not always exactly what you're trying to do with media campaigns. So, and I would say that what you're moving towards is probably something that's a little bit more like a balanced scorecard in terms of being able to measure both the short-term commercial impact of something, but also the ability to weave in things like lifetime customer value and customer acquisition cost. I think at a financial level, that'll be the biggest change over the next 12 to 24 months. And this echoes kind of the conversation we had about CRM in the last podcast. I think all brands are going to need to adopt an element of CRM strategy and metrics. And that's basically where you start to get into the customer acquisition cost, lifetime customer value calculation. But I think there's other objectives that you have with the brand campaign as well, or a media campaign. You know, some of it's equity development, some of it's increasing household penetration. You know, there's a bunch of, so I do think that you're going to get moved towards something that's a little bit more balanced than just the simple ROAS calculation. Just because when you put a pile of money right at the purchase decision, yeah, that's probably going to have a bigger return than other things do. But that doesn't mean that the only thing you should do is put a pile of money at the purchase decision, because over time, you're going to find, one, the pile of money you need to put there is bigger, and two, the number of people that are going to walk past that pile is going to shrink. So that's the way I would probably think about it.
Great.
So Bryan, if I think about the world of search, which we've kind of just had a short discussion on now between Amazon and Google, and the difference between the two, where one could actually result in a conversion, it's clear to me that search belongs in the media world with marketing, and then Amazon slowly making its way there. But what's the role of an agency in this process go forward in SEM?
Well, this gets back to the conversation we're having, because I probably don't share your clarity on exactly where search belongs in different ecosystems, because I find that so much of retailer search today I can't help but I spent 23 years on the commerce side of things before coming to a media, before getting a little bit more involved in a media agency. It just looks more like trade spend to me. Like that's what you're actually trying to accomplish. The people that know how to do that should have a lot of influence in it. I think it's easier to teach shopper marketers a little bit about search so that they know how to make that work than it is to teach search marketers that have never been involved in a directly commercial relationship. It's just, I think if you're trying to ramp up, you may not want to put all of your retail search in your marketing department, especially if you're trying to grow the capability. I think it's just easier housed with people that know retail. So yeah, but I think in general, over time, as retailer search engines theoretically become more sophisticated and less, basically keyword lookup tools, which is kind of what they are now. I think you'll probably see an argument that's different. I think that the analogy I used, I was talking to a client about this today, is that search is and the other problem is when you have search specific agencies that get involved that don't know commerce, that just turns into a nightmare. So I think what you've got is today, it's a lot like a river delta. It's incredibly fertile, right? So it's an incredibly fertile area, but you've got a confluence of bodies of water that are overlapping on each other, and it's messy as all get out. So just bring your hip boots as you go wading through it, and then just try to figure it out. But the thing is, if you drop something in the ground there, it'll grow. So in the end, it's probably not the burning platform problem for most companies, since if you know enough about search to be dangerous, most of what you do is going to work. So.
Yeah.
Brian, which components of media are best insourced by brands versus outsourced to an agency?
I work for an agency, none of them. So what are you, high? No.
There's no one from Omnicom listening to this yet.
Yeah, it's just the three of us, right? So the first lesson of podcasting is, as always, don't get fired. No, I think at a practical level, the temptation to insource to me becomes problematic when you're trying to assess media mix, because you guys have both worked in big companies, right? You know how this works. You're going to get 9 people at company X that have an expertise in Amazon search marketing, and those 9 people have zero interest in ceding $1 of budget to anyone else. And they're going to hold that. The other team's going to hold their part. Your flexibility is going to go down, not because you're hiring less capable people, though you might be. Your flexibility is going to go down because of the way you're structured. And you're not going to be able to de-silo that expertise perhaps as easily as an agency that all they want to do is get paid. The rapacious appetite for billing of an agency in that case is actually an advantage, because they're going to approach you with a whole myriad of different solutions as a way to try to monetize that. I think over time, there's a risk of becoming deeply static with your media choices that comes from insourcing, as well as some of the other tried and true agency arguments against it around talent development and stuff like that, which I think are also true. But I think longer term, that would be my worry. My other worry is that the ease with which programmatic and digital media can be placed internally versus externally. To an ad agency, programmatic versus a TV shoot is kind of a neutral capability set. They're good at both. There's no way your internal agencies are going to be as good at certain types of marketing that are more labor intensive than sitting at a keyboard, tapping 10 keystrokes and placing a campaign. I think it gravitates you towards a world of incremental advertising, which may or may not be what you want your brand to do.
Brian, you tap upon a very important area for ad agency, which is how should an ad agency really transform, go forward in the space of skill set, aka talent acquisition, maybe tools and technology, as well as for the first time, maybe to get a thorough understanding of how the retail side works, and maybe even show up at a retail meeting with a customer?
Well, I think, you can, you've got, most of the agency, most of the big holding groups have agencies that do specialize in retail, obviously. So there's my fine colleagues at ORG, WPP's got Geometry, FCB's got FCB Red, Publicis got Epsilon, and ARC. So I think they all own capabilities in that space. which is fine. I think the winner is going to be the one that links those capabilities to the core media capabilities and the core advertising capabilities. And this is a weird question for me to answer because that's literally my job. So is to make sure that Omnicom wins that race. So I'm probably not going to give a lot of detail around what we're trying to do there, with all due respect to your listeners. But suffice it to say that the objective is to show people a connected commerce landscape where, as an agency, you can help them all the way through it. So all the way from the very early stages of demand creation through purchase conversion, CRM, loyalty, social sharing, back around that loop, if you will, that what we call the affinity loop here. That affinity loop, you just have to be really good at all of it, and really good at having the parts of that affinity loop talk to each other. So I think that's where, and look, I mean, I think in the end, I think the other thing that agencies are going to bring to the table far better than their internal competitors are is just great creative. I think it's very, very hard to run great creative without it being a dedicated part of what you do. I just think I think that's something that internal agencies are going to find that difficult.
All right, Bryan, last question of the episode, and it's a teaser to lead into our final part 6.
Excellent.
Any predictions over the next 12 months for how media is going to change? Big changes.
It's going to change faster, I think, than it has in the previous 12 to 24. I'll give you 2 thoughts, which are that I think that brands are starting to discover, both from strategy and necessity, that there are other digital platforms in the world apart from Google and Facebook. Now, Amazon is the, quote, biggest of those, though, Sri, as you well know, all Amazon did to make their advertising business twice as big as it was start to count a bunch of the stuff that was below the line as above the line. So because they had to, because FASB corrected the way they were doing their accounting. Okay, that's cool. And even beyond those 3. So I would say that I think people are going to get much more conversant in how to use massive digital properties and massive attention gathering properties that today are fairly small in the marketing budget, and amplify those. And I'll give you 4 that I think are going to be really important. One is Snapchat, one is Pinterest, one is gaming, which I think is an enormous upside opportunity for brands that's completely ignored. But the last one, probably as big as all 3 put together, is Instagram. I just, the amount of attention Instagram gathers versus its seasoned effectiveness as an advertising platform is way out of whack. So I think if you look at those 4 things and the amount of attention they gather versus the amount of effective media spend that's in that ecosystem, I think they're all going to grow super, super quickly.
Great.
Well, Bryan, what a fascinating conversation that actually ended on above the line and below the line. So
yeah, and I think
I
think I managed to keep my job through it too. We'll see.
I know you and I will have a million more conversations on above the line and below the line. I'm looking forward to those. I can't thank you enough, both on behalf of Peter and me, for joining us yet again on episode 5, focused on Media 2020. Peter, as always, thank you for your wisdom on this show and giving consumers what they want to hear about the retail transformation. For all of our listeners, viewers, readers, you can follow us on LinkedIn and read our articles on all of these topics at the link below, and follow us by actually looking at the link below, which is #Shri and PVSB. That's and with an AND. You can also look for our YouTube playlist and view the content as we speak to Bryan here on all our other episodes by going to the link below, which is tinyurl.com/
Shri and PVSB.
Thank you. And you can
if you
also
want to see us on the podcast.
And you can also listen in case you're not a viewer and you don't like to read. And that is tinyurl.com/ CPG for consumer packaged goods, CPG podcast. So we will look forward to having Bryan back for the 6th part of our 6-part series on the transformation of the retail industry, as well as discussing the omnichannel 2020 shopper. So Bryan, we'll look forward to seeing you again. Thank you, Peter.
Look forward to being back.
Thank you.
The
content in this podcast episode is provided for general informational purposes only. By listening to our episode, you understand that no information contained in this episode should be construed as advice from CPG Guys LLC or the individual author, hosts, or guests, nor is it intended to be a substitute for research on any subject matter. Reference to any specific product or entity does not constitute an endorsement or recommendation by CPG Guys LLC. The views expressed by guests are their own, and their appearance on the program does not imply an endorsement of them or any entity they represent. The views expressed by CPG Guys LLC do not represent the views of their employers or the entity they represent. CPG Guys LLC expressly disclaims any and all liability or responsibility for any direct, indirect, incidental, special, consequential, or other damages arising out of any individual's use of, reference to, or inability to use this podcast or the information we present in this podcast.